Chief of Police Edward Flynn joins us, and MSNBC political analyst Professor Michael Eric Dyson is here with me in New York. Chief Flynn, thank you, sir, for joining us. As a law enforcement professional charged with maintaining the peace of the nation, is it your view that more guns will lead to improved law and order in this country?
Well, I've read the NRA's report, and it looks to me to be a cynical but clever diversion from the important discussion you alluded to in the introduction. You know, to follow the logic of their report, it's a little bit like if the CDC was run by the NRA, they would oppose flu vaccines in favor of building as many hospitals as possible. This is what this NRA report does. It doesn't talk about costs, and it cynically expects local government to go to the Department of Homeland Security for funding that quite simply does not exist. It's really, as I say, cynical and a diversion from the real issues.
But sir, you lead the good guys with guns. Is that all that's necessary for more people to have guns, as the NRA propose, in order to resolve the issue of gun violence in this country?
Certainly not. I mean, police officers have a very important role to play in schools, and one of them is security, as well as working with young students and getting them to the right start in life. But let's just follow the logic here. There's 278 schools in Milwaukee. I spend $2 million a year providing 28 officers to work with school security on school safety issues. Now, if you do the math, we're talking $20 million for Milwaukee to provide an armed police officer in every school. It's lunacy. We're not going to get a $20 million grant from Homeland Security. Chicago isn't going to get a $200 million grant. This is a way of moving the discussion away from the important issue, which is keeping firearms out of the hands of the dangerous and the criminal. And the NRA's stated position is to oppose any attempt for us to close the gun show loophole and the private sale loophole. 92% of the guns seized from criminals in Milwaukee were bought legally under the current law.
Professor Dyson, the NRA keeps telling us that every aspect of our life should be accompanied by a firearm. A teacher should have a gun, the barman should have a gun, the dentist should have a gun, presumably the doctor. You're a sociologist. What does that tell you about our culture if every aspect of it should be soaked in firearms?
It is an addiction to the fantasy that guns provide, the fantasy of a security that can never be vouchsafed, that can never be secured by the possession of a firearm, because so many people in the possession of a firearm have died. And the people who are ostensibly committed to securing our children have sometimes made tragic mistakes with those firearms. The chief has been extraordinarily eloquent about this. NRA stands for no reason allowed, it seems to be, Martin, because there's no rational process, as the chief has indicated here, that leads from one premise to the next conclusion. And I think the reality is that arming our teachers with guns, the zero-tolerance policies in schools have already disproportionately disadvantaged Black and Latino students. What do you think would happen with guns in the possession of in the possession of teachers and other people placed there? We know that the urban demographic would be targeted, though most of the shooting that's been done in terms of mass killings have come from broader mainstream communities. It doesn't add up, and it doesn't address the situation on the ground.
Chief Flynn, we've been watching the alarming case in Texas, as I'm sure you have, where we're learning that a county DA was shot 20 times in his home. This is a guy who knew he was at risk, said he was carrying a gun to walk his dog, and yet the bad guy got him. Does this not refute completely the theory that a good man with a gun is the only answer, and that appears to be the only answer that the NRA has?
Well, I think it's highly likely that whoever murdered him came by the gun through lawful processes. And that's one of the great frustrations in law enforcement. We don't have time for ideology working the city's streets. And our concern is right now that over 40% of firearms are bought without a background check. Where do you think the mentally ill who are dangerous, the ones that are dangerous, where do you think they get their firearms? The criminals don't have to steal their firearms. They can buy them legally through private sales and gun shows. It's an awful problem for us.
But what's your reaction? But what's your reaction, Chief?
Congress would face.
But Chief, what's your reaction when Senator Lindsey Graham says background checks will never pass? Waste of time.
It's called, well, first of all, we know one thing about Congress. Nobody there is going to get a Profile in Courage award anytime soon. So I commend the legislators in Connecticut and Colorado for their courageous stands. My frustration with Congress is the following. It would be one thing if they were afraid to pass this law because they were doing important work, but they're not getting anything else done either. Now, this is a national problem. And only 1% of people are likely to fail their background checks anyway. So this is not going to keep hands out of the hands of the law-abiding. But it's absolute lunacy to continue the situation we have now, where any criminal can buy a gun in this country, or anyone with delusions of grandeur and delusions of mass murder can lawfully buy a high-capacity, high-quality firearm and commit murder. I mean, the murderer in Newtown got off 150 rounds in 5 minutes. Even if there had been a police officer standing at the door, he may well have been dead in the first 30 seconds. We've got to prevent the wrong people from getting firearms. And it is extremely frustrating for us in law enforcement to see the continued cowardice, dithering, and subservience to the firearms industry we're seeing in Congress.
Professor Dyson, to that point, we've just gotten a new picture of Newtown shooter Adam Lanza. And in response to that shooting, a package of very strong gun safety measures is on track to pass in Connecticut this week. It bans high-capacity clips, assault weapons, even forces some dangerous gun criminals to register. The NRA's Mr. Hutchinson called it totally inadequate at protecting schools. But is this something you'd like to see?
I mean, obviously, this kind of ban is extremely critical because it takes out of the hands, as the chief has indicated, of people who are out to do harm to our children and other members of our society, like law enforcement officials, the DA who was killed, and others, and he was the second one. So the reality is that, as the chief has indicated, we're not going to stop law-abiding citizens from, expertly and efficiently and safely and legally dispatching their desire to be a hunter. The reality is, for those people mentally ill on the one hand and those who are criminally inclined, those people will have a more severe test to meet. And if we say we're committed to our children and we're concerned about their future, it makes sense to have these bans in place. The only reason it doesn't make sense is for those who have been captivated by the extraordinary blitzkrieg that the NRA has done on politicians. And as the chief has indicated, not only would they not get a Profile in Courage, they wouldn't even get a Robert F. Kennedy Award for that matter.
I'm reminded of George Orwell in 1984, who said war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Chief Edward Flynn, Professor Michael Eric Dyson, thank you both.
Thank you.